think about how quickly things can change? One minute you're just going about your day and the next, everything's different. It's what's so unsettling about cases like this one we're looking at today, the McCaster case, this sudden plunge into the unknown.
It's a story that, yeah, it really captivated Spain back in '89. Three young people vanish: Rosario, Valeriano, Pilar. Two found dead, and the circumstances,
Yeah.
baffling to say the least. And the third, well, the third just vanished.
Gone without a trace. And just to set the scene, picture this. It's January of '89 in McCastry. It's a small Spanish mountain town. And winters had got this place in its grip. Harsh, cold. I was reading they had a particularly bad cold snap that year.
You're right to emphasize the setting. Even something as simple as the weather plays a role here. It all starts with a local farmer. He's heading out to his cottage, the Caseta del Mestre. He kept his tools there. Imagine a small, probably pretty drafty building. Anyway, he notices the padlock's missing.
Okay, so already a break in his routine, that feeling of something's not right.
Exactly. And it gets worse. Inside, it's clear someone's been there, but there's no sign of who. Broken glass, things out of place, and the remnants of a fire, like someone had been trying to stay warm.
Seeking shelter from that bitter cold, I can just imagine.
And that's what makes the discovery in the bedroom so unsettling. A young woman just lying on the bed, seemingly asleep.
She was gone when he tried to wake her, right? I remember reading that detail.
He rushed to get the Guardia Civil, and when they arrived, the scene was just as he described. This young woman, no older than 17, just lying there peacefully. No ID, no signs of a struggle, no obvious injuries. Just imagine the questions swirling around that cottage.
It's like something out of a movie, almost too eerie to be real. And then, of course, the autopsy. I read that it didn't provide many answers.
They called it an autopsia blanca, essentially a white autopsy, meaning they had no answers. No answers. Imagine the frustration. There was some indication of possible asphyxiation, but nothing conclusive. No signs of trauma, no toxins.
Now, I know this was back in '89, but wouldn't they have had ways to figure out what happened even then?
You would think so, right? But you have to remember, forensic technology wasn't as advanced. And this was a small town. The autopsy report, it mentions limited resources. Even the conditions at the time weren't ideal.
So if they couldn't find a cause of death, what were they left with? Just this unidentified girl in a cottage?
Almost. There were two scraps of paper clutched in her hand. One had the name Vale scrawled next to a phone number, and the other just said 9 hours with another number. These were their only leads.
Okay, so let's break down these clues. What did those numbers lead to?
The number marked Vale, well, that one took them on a bit of a chase. It belonged to a woman in Valencia who was actually hospitalized at the time. But a neighbor recognized the girl in the photo the police showed her, said it was the woman's son, Valeriano. He was about the right age, but the neighbor couldn't say for sure if it was him.
So one phone number, a possible name, but still no real identification for the girl in the cottage. What about the other number, the 9 hours one?
That one led them to a bakery in Benicalap. And this is where it gets interesting. The couple who ran the bakery, they were sure they recognized the girl in the photo. They'd seen her just a week earlier with a young man getting into a blue car.
They probably thought they had a break in the case, finally.
They did. But it turned out the girl they thought was dead was very much alive. Imagine their surprise when she walked into the station a few days later. Turns out, the couple who ran the bakery, they had mixed her up with their babysitter, who had also been at the bakery around the same time.
Okay, so a case of mistaken identity. But did anything come of it?
It did. It was a lucky break, really. See, both the dead girl and the babysitter, they had both written down the bakery's phone number while applying for jobs.
So both numbers, in a way, were connected to the bakery. That's a pretty wild coincidence.
And it meant they could finally put a name to the girl found in the cottage, Rosario Gallete.
Rosario. It's tragic. At this point, she's not just a nameless face in a photo anymore. But it still doesn't explain what she was doing in that cottage or how she died.
Exactly. And what about this Vale and the other number? Remember, the police still had no idea who he was. That's where that other phone number, the one that led them to that woman in Valencia, becomes crucial. She told the police she hadn't seen her son, Valeriano, in days. And the last time anyone saw him, he was with two friends, one of whom was Rosario.
So not only did they identify Rosario, but they found a potential link to Vale. It's like those puzzle pieces suddenly start clicking into place.
A classic example of how these seemingly insignificant details can just break open a case. And it gets more intriguing. The woman also mentioned that Valeriana's other friend, a girl named Pilar Ruiz Barriga, was missing too.
Pilar. So now we have two missing teenagers and one dead, all connected. Did any of their families report them missing?
That's the part that always struck me. None of the families had filed reports.
Wow. Huh?
Yeah, it speaks to the complexities of their lives, Maybe even a fear of getting the authorities involved.
It makes you wonder what their lives were like, what led them to that cottage in the first place.
The police were asking the same questions. They learned that Rosario and Valeriano were known to spend time in a park, Camales.
Camales.
It had a bit of a reputation back then, a gathering place for a rough crowd involved in petty theft.
So maybe they fell in with the wrong crowd.
Possibly. Witnesses described Rosario and Valeriano as polite, almost shy, not the type you'd expect to find mixed up in that world. Pilar, on the other hand, seemed to have more connections to that side of things.
So maybe Rosario and Valeriano were drawn into something, I don't know, something they didn't fully understand, especially with Pilar as their friend.
That's a theory investigators explored. There were even whispers that the pair might have been afraid of some of the people Pilar knew, individuals known for aggression, even violence. It paints a picture of vulnerability, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, and it makes their disappearance even more concerning. Did the police ever figure out why they went to the cottage?
It seems their movements were driven by, well, a need for shelter, a desire to stay hidden. Remember, it was the dead of winter. They needed a place to stay warm.
And the cottage, isolated, seemingly abandoned, it would have been the perfect hideout.
Exactly. And remember, Pilar's family, they used to live in a town called Catadau, not far from Macaster. It seems Pilar had maintained some connections there.
Catadau. That name rings a bell.
It's a small town, but it plays a significant role in this case. The Guardia Civil started asking around in Catadau, and they discovered that Rosario, Valeriano, and Pilar had been seen there in the weeks leading up to Rosario's death.
What were they doing there? Did anyone see them the day Rosario disappeared?
There were sightings at a local bar, the Bar Catadau. Pilar's mother used to work there, so they'd sometimes go there for food.
Did anyone at the bar remember seeing them that day?
There was a local man, Miguelo, who they were seen talking to. Naturally, he became a person of interest, but the police ruled him out fairly quickly.
What made them dismiss him as a suspect?
He didn't have a driver's license. And considering the distance between Catadau and that isolated cottage where they found Rosario, it seemed unlikely he could have transported them.
So they were back to square one. Rosario dead in the cottage, Valeriano and Pilar missing, no real leads to go on.
Not quite. While the bakery with the 9 hours note turned out to be a dead end, the investigation into Valeriano's disappearance took a grim turn 3 months after Rosario's body was found. A man searching for asparagus in the area surrounding the cottage stumbled upon a body.
They found Valeriano.
They did. And here's where the story takes another unsettling twist. His body was discovered just 400 meters from the cottage where they found Rosario.
400 meters. But how? How could search teams have missed that? It doesn't make sense.
It's a question that has haunted investigators and fueled speculation for years. Remember, this was 1989. Search and rescue techniques weren't as advanced. Valeriano's body was hidden in a ditch, obscured by bushes.
So a tragic oversight, compounded by the limitations of the time. What did the autopsy on Valeriano reveal?
Sadly, not much. Unlike Rosario's autopsy, which was conducted at a forensic institute, Valeriano's was performed in, well, a makeshift morgue at the Macaster Cemetery. The conditions were less than ideal.
Meaning?
It meant they couldn't rule out crucial possibilities. They didn't, for example, test for toxins like they did with Rosario. The cause of death remained undetermined. Another autopsia blanca.
2 bodies, both found near that cottage, and no clear answers about how they died.
Precisely. And still, no sign of Pilar.
It's almost unfathomable. 2 teenagers found dead, and their friend still missing. With so many questions surrounding Rosario and Valeriano's deaths, what were the initial theories? What might have happened in that cottage?
The initial police theory, which is understandable given what they were dealing with, was that there was no foul play. Remember how peacefully Rosario was found? They considered accidental death. Maybe carbon monoxide poisoning from the fireplace?
Yeah, given the traces of a fire they found, it seems like a plausible scenario, especially with those harsh winter conditions.
Exactly. It seemed to fit, at least initially. The thought was that maybe Rosario succumbed first, and then Valeriano, in a panic, tried to get help but succumbed to the cold. Or even the same cause, whatever that may have been.
But if that's the case, it still doesn't explain what happened to Pilar. If it was an accident, wouldn't she have, I don't know, sought help? Or at least contacted someone by then?
You've hit upon the biggest hole in that theory. Pilar's disappearance. It loomed large over the entire investigation. Why hadn't she surfaced? It just didn't add up.
So with the accidental death theory on shaky ground, what other avenues did investigators explore?
Remember, this was a small town, and this case, well, it had everyone on edge. With few leads and mounting pressure to find answers, the police were open to anything. Anything that might shed some light. And that's where things take an even stranger turn. They were contacted by a psychic.
A psychic?
This psychic claimed Valeriano's spirit had led him to the body.
Okay. That seems like something out of a TV show. Did they really put much stock in that?
It's easy to be skeptical, I know, but you have to understand the context. This wasn't just some random tip. This person provided specific details about the location of Valeriano's body.
Details that turned out to be accurate.
Yes. Whether it was a lucky guess, intuition, something more, it added another layer of intrigue to an already baffling case. But while the psychic's involvement generated headlines, it didn't ultimately lead to any concrete answers.
Sounds like a dead end shrouded in the paranormal. What about Pilar? Was there any progress in finding her?
The break in Pilar's case, if you can even call it that, came from a chilling source. An anonymous tip in April of '89. The information suggested that Pilar's body might be in an irrigation canal near the town of Torres.
Did they ever determine who made that call?
Unfortunately, no. But tragically, the information turned out to be accurate. In May of '89, children playing near the canal discovered the badly decomposed body of a young woman. It was a gruesome discovery. She was missing a hand and a foot.
And they suspected it was Pilar. Were they able to confirm her identity?
That's where things get even more complicated. Based on the evidence, the police, they strongly believed the body was Pilar. However, her family, they never officially identified the body or the clothes found with it.
Why wouldn't they come forward? It's heartbreaking. Did the police ever determine why they chose to remain silent?
Their reasons remain a mystery to this day. Some speculate fear might have played a role, or perhaps they knew something they weren't willing to share. Whatever the reason, their silence only deepened the mystery surrounding Pilar's fate.
It's a tragic element of this case, the lack of closure for her loved ones. But if we assume this was Pilar, the level of violence, the dismemberment, it suggests a level of brutality we haven't seen in this case so far.
Precisely. If the body was Pilar, it suggests a completely different perpetrator. Or at least a different motive than in the deaths of Rosario and Valeriano. It muddies the waters considerably.
So where did the investigation go from there? With this new, horrific discovery, were there any new leads? Any new suspects?
Despite their best efforts, the investigation into Pilar's case stalled. They explored every lead, every whisper, every rumor, but nothing panned out. Remember Miguelo, the man from the bar?
Yes, the one who didn't have a driver's license.
Right. After clearing him, suspicion briefly fell on a known drug trafficker in the area. They called him Wichita.
Wichita. What led them to him?
It all stemmed from another anonymous call, this time to a drug hotline. The caller directly implicated Wichita in the deaths and even provided specific details about where Pilar's body might be found.
So another chillingly accurate tip from an unknown source.
It was. But when they questioned him, Wichita vehemently denied any involvement. And frustratingly, the police couldn't find any tangible evidence connecting him to the crimes.
So another dead end.
It's a pattern we see often in cases like this, unfortunately.
Oh.
Despite their best efforts, investigators were left with more questions than answers. 3 young lives cut short. A small town left to grapple with the weight of unanswered questions. It's a stark reminder of how easily cases, even horrific ones, can fade from public memory.
And it makes you wonder how many other cases like this are out there. Stories untold, victims forgotten.
It's a sobering thought. But by bringing these cases to light, by continuing to ask questions, maybe, just maybe, we can keep those memories alive and even one day find the answers that have eluded us for so long.
That's the hope, isn't it? Well, that brings us to the end of another deep dive. A huge thank you to you for joining me today, and to all of you listening out there, thank you for spending this time with us. Until next time, remember, the truth is out there somewhere.